Yeah, great. So we, yeah. Yeah, there's a sign-up sheet that's coming around. Can you sign up on that? We've got a whole bunch of people new to the group or new to this for this weekend because of the B classes and also because we have a special speaker here. Yeah, this is Jim Ulrich from Knox Cellars Mason Bees, and we can thank the Hood Canal Bridge gods that that the bridge was closed or open or whatever the definition is. He's coming up from Bremerton, and this is a really, really important pollinator. I know that, for example, the apple orchard at Alpenfire uses nothing but mason bees to pollinate his apple trees. So, so this is a little expansion outside of the honeybee world, but thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you. Give you this, we can can these out.
Oh.
Put this young guy to work here.
Okay.
Well, what he's passing out is a little 2-page flyer that we hand out at all of our talks and whenever we have a booth at a home show or something like that. And so it's kind of my 1-hour talk all into this little 2-page thing, and or my 1-hour talk that sometimes will roll on forever. So you can raise your hand and cut me off when we reach that certain point. But this is my gnarly little sign here, still working. I don't want to get rid of it because it's got a lot of miles on it. You can also take pictures of that if you like. And our contact information, my business card, and then that yellow sheet that's coming around, you'll see my contact information. So later into this season, which continues into May, certainly send me an email if you're into the Mason bees and with questions that you might have or pictures of any problems that you might be seeing in your particular group of Mason bees. And how many of you are brand new to the Orchard Mason bees? I'm guessing probably most of you are really into it. New Orchard Mason bee folks, how many are new? Well, just a few, okay. And all the rest of you are veterans. And anybody in here, how many of you are still using the old wood blocks with the drilled holes? Oh boy, okay. I'll cover that. And okay, keep hands up again. Are they successful? Are you still seeing them working okay for you? Are you able to clean them out, or do you put straws in them?
Drill them out.
Drill them out again, okay. And we'll talk about that a little bit. What has happened years ago, it was probably 15 years ago, the guy that wrote the Bible, and if you don't have this is really a good read. There's a couple chapters in here by Brian Griffin. He's out of Bellingham, Washington, by the way, who originally started Knox Cellars Mason Bees that we bought. He's now making ukuleles, so you can look for Brian Griffin and you can see his ukulele work. Obviously an interesting guy. But about 15 years ago, he found a mite infestation in the blocks that we've been using, and that's all we used to sell were the wood blocks with the drilled holes. And we started to see a mite infestation called the Crombini mite. And I don't think that's had any effect on the honeybee group, but certainly on the mason bees, it's had an adverse effect. What we were finding, they were getting into the blocks that we had and laying their eggs in there, and then that mite infestation would infest a particular section of any of the tubes that we had. And so what we started to do, then we made our wood blocks with cleanouts on the back so we could open them up and then really push it out, say with a 22mm bore brush, like a .22 rifle, clean that out real good. But it just didn't seem to catch up, and our bee population, again, about 15 years ago, began to drop precipitously fast. He then contacted the USDA lab, the big one down in Utah, and a Dr. Torchio, he talks about it in here, and they identified this mite. And so that's when they decided we are going to go to the straw systems. We're going to be able to go to the paper straw systems and or the segmented wood blocks that we'll see up here. And that way we're able to open them up much easier and clean them. So those of you, if your wood blocks that are drilled holes and you haven't cleaned them out like this gentleman, and if nothing has happened this coming year, about April 15th, look at your old wood blocks And if none of the bees have emerged from that mudded over front, like you'll see on our cardboard tubes here, you see the mudded over front, we'll pass this around, and we'll talk about this quite a bit as we go by, but if your blocks look like they're still mudded over by April 15th, just take them down and burn them and get rid of them. Because more than likely you have some sort of an infestation in there that'll spread to your native mason bees that are in your backyard area. So, any questions on that? Because we did have a lot of hands that are still using the wood blocks.
When are they gonna do this?
They're hatching about March 15th.
Great, thanks.
We'll get into that full cycle. So right around about mid-March is when they hatch. Brian's book here, there's a couple chapters in the back. If you have trouble sleeping at night, there's a good chapters in there that'll put you to sleep. But the rest of his book is fantastic. The orchard mason bee is our great pollinator, as the introduction said. It's our native pollinator that we've had in this neighborhood for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's like putting up a birdhouse for our chickadees and our nuthatches and our woodpeckers. We're providing housing of different styles for the orchard mason bee. The fact that they are native, we're not introducing any species that's not, a part of this area, but we're introducing into our backyard this wonderful bee that does your late winter, early spring pollination. And their work normally, as the gentleman asked, when do they start? Normally it's March, mid-March. Last year, they were right on target. I keep a journal. I have 25 years of journals on my mason bees. I'm kind of nerdy about that kind of stuff. But when I see my first mason bee, when the last female dies, the weather reports each day during the season, and in most cases, and when we're talking about the bees, anything I might say here today, anything is all weather related to what's happening in that natural environment. Probably the same applies to your honeybees. So when the weather is looking good, like last year, on March 15th or so, the temperature started to get into the high 50s. All of a sudden, the population of males came out. About a week later, all the females came out, and the process of pollination began. So this past year in Bremerton, where I live, March 16th was my first male. Years before, I've had them as early as the end of February, and about 4 years ago, I had them as late as April 7th. Now last year, we'll just look at the normal year. Last year, they came out March 16th, the males, they go out and they do their thing, getting a lot of nectar and get their energy built up. And it's good to see there's a lot of men here, because I just want to say, the men come out, they get their energy up, and they have one function in life. The bee has one function. You guys understand that. Then we all die, and then the ladies do all the work. So this is exactly the same in the mason bee effort. We will do our thing, and that happens quickly. Males come out, and then about a week later, and again, it was about March 23rd, 24th, when the females, I started to see them come out. The males, they're easy to identify. The males have a little white a tuft on their head, it looks like a mustache, and they're tiny, tiny little bee. The females come out, and they're quite robust, and they're hairy. They're quite, they don't shave their hair, they've got that hair, and they're quite large. And when they arrive at the front of all of these houses, of these different shelters that we have, when they arrive out here as coming out from the back, the males immediately land on them, and there's this big effort for about a day or so where all the females come out and they're all impregnated pretty much at the same time. And it's fascinating to watch all that battle and the process that's going on. Then about a day or two later, the males do die, and then the female is resting. She's going out and getting her nectar and her pollen, and then she begins her work in your backyard, and that will continue. Last year, my last female lived until it was about May 7th, so I saw my last one did her work and laid all of her eggs that she had, but then she died, and you can kind of watch that whole process. When she comes out, after she's gotten some nectar for her energy level to get up, she then goes out and starts to visit, and she'll find mud, in your backyard area. And we have plenty of clay. I just dig a number of shallow little holes around my yard that are in front of where all my houses are. I mist them with water every morning, and so they can find and sort through the clay and dust that I might have around my yard and get their mud that they'll pack into these holes. And like that can that we passed around, they all seem to have the same consistency and the same color. Every female is doing pretty much the same thing and sorting through. It ends up to be a gray-looking mass of mud. Let me pass this around. This is kind of fun to see. These are some of the mud plugs that we pulled out of some of our straws. And what she does, she'll make about 12 trips of gathering mud, And her first effort is putting all that mud into the back. So she'll gather all that mud, and when you see that little container, she'll have the mud up against this back wall that we have, and then the very front of the mud, she'll smooth it out, and so it's kind of a rounded texture to it that you'll see on each one of these that's coming around. And what she has done is she's taken her body, when she's got enough mud in there, she's taken her round little butt and she's formed out that mud, and then she takes her wings and she'll flutter her wings inside of there. You can feel them inside of the straws that we have. And then she'll go out and she's gathering nectar and pollen. She's created this little compartment, this little smooth shell, and then she'll go out and make around 25 to 35 trips of gathering nectar and pollen. And I've got a couple samples of some of those where the egg or the larva fell off of it, so you can see the nectar and pollen. That's about the size of a pencil eraser, that she'll gather that much nectar and pollen in each one of the holes that she's working on. And when she goes in, she'll take that pollen off her body, regurgitate the nectar, mix it to a particular consistency, and pack it against that mud wall. Now it's just secure against the curve of that mud. When she's finished with that, she creates a little angle to that nectar and pollen. So here's the straw in the hole that she has gone into, but she's got a little angle to it, for the reason being that when she lays her egg, she'll push that egg right into that nectar mass that's right there, and hopefully it'll stay. And after that, after she's laid that egg, she rests for just a bit, and then she's back out getting more mud. So from back to front, mud, nectar, pollen, and an egg, mud, nectar, pollen, egg, all the way up to the front. And in some of the cases, we'll have as many as 10 to 11 cocoons in every single one of these 6-inch straws. When she gets to the very front, one of the fascinating things at the front of every one of these, in the front of every one of these holes, such as this, and the others that we have up here, the very front, she'll mud over the very front, like that can that we passed around, but she did not lay an egg behind that front section. She's created a false compartment. So if a nuthatch or a flicker, your insectivores in our environment, get up there and they see the mud, they'll pluck the mud out of that front area, but they don't find any food. Thus, the bird thinks, well, there's nothing else back in there. The flickers have gotten a little smarter, though. The flicker's a pretty smart bird. They've got a bigger beak, and they've got that long 4-inch tongue. So they've learned to go in a little bit farther and, hopefully snag some food. Well, guess what the food is that they snag? Any of the predators that are getting in there, it's the male cocoons. Well, of course, we sacrifice the males again. Put them out to battle. The females are all laid in the back. So 3 inches back or 4 inches back in this container, all the females are back here. And all these years and all the things that I've opened up and the thousands that Brian Griffin has opened up and his good buddy in Utah, it's always the same way. And I'll be at say like the Northwest Flower and Garden Show. We've got a big presentation there. I'll open some of these up, and it's kind of a show and tell, and they'll see the difference between the different cocoons that are in there. The cocoons that we have, and the reason how we can tell them, the larger cocoons are the female, the larger cocoons. The smaller cocoons are their male. So it's pretty simple when you're pulling them out of the straws and harvesting them, that you'll be able to tell the difference between male and female. So we've kind of gotten all of the mud off of these and all the fecal matter off of them, and we kind of clean them, and I put them into a much larger colander than this. But when I'm harvesting cocoons, I'll put them into something like this, and then I kind of shake them around. And I do this from October through February. So we're harvesting and cleaning. We're a farmer, basically, of cocoons. We're using this colander to get rid of all the debris that's in these different cells. And the debris is the mud, leftover mud, and the fecal matter that's around the different cocoons. After we've done that with the colander activity, I'm in my sink of the house, and then I take the cold water wand and I just rinse off all the cocoons. And then I put them on a paper towel, dry them off, and I'm ready to sell them. So it's really a pretty simple process. And if you've heard about bleaching, you don't need to bleach the cocoons. The cocoons carry no bacteria. Thus, there's no reason to use, bleach. You've probably heard that in a number of different avenues. You go to see YouTubes of people working with their cocoons, and many of them have been doing the bleach operation. Brian Griffin, the reason I say this, I go back to the experts. Brian Griffin tried it when he first heard about it. This is about 8 years ago. And he noticed that the fur on his cocoons, that little outside piece, a little bit of the fabric of the cocoon that was on the outside, it disintegrated. The bleach, the chlorine, basically ate those small pieces of fiber in the cocoon. Well, what would chlorine do? Chlorine, it does dissipate, of course, but it will soak into the cocoon, we assume. It's soaking into the cocoon, potentially, harmful to the orchard mason bee. And we haven't proven all of that, but then again, when he saw the fur being eaten away, he said, well, I'm not going to do this. And there's no reason for chlorine because I have no bacteria, around my various cocoons. Question?
Thank you. Is the fecal matter from the cocoon or from the mother bee?
Question is the fecal matter from the cocoon or the mother, the female?
The female.
The fecal matter is when the egg hatches, and then the larva, its little mouth, it has no legs, but it has a mouth. Its little mouth is buried into the food, and it'll eat all this food, and it takes about 25, 26 days to eat all this food. Okay, it's gotten quite big. It's gotten quite large and fat. Big wiener sausage. Well, on day 27, it's quite constipated. So on day 27, it poops. So, and we've watched this. We have a couple little fancy little observation boxes where we can open up this little sliding top and we can watch the activity going on in there. So I'll just pass this around. It's kind of fun to take a look at what they're doing on the inside. So on day 27, all of this black poopy or fecal matter is deposited in each section. Then the larva, after it's pooped, is quite exhausted, and it feels pretty good though. It then spins its cocoon. And you can watch that. You will, on day, let's say 28 or 29, all of a sudden you'll start to see that larva spinning, and then you'll slowly start to see it disappear. The next morning, they're all inside of their own original cocoon. Thus, the metamorphosis of growing, continues at that time all the way into the fall of that, upcoming year. So this particular year, the males come out mid-March, the females about a week later. She goes out and pollinates and begins to lay her eggs. All the eggs are usually laid by, again, mid-May, early May, and then that metamorphosis of growing inside of their cocoons continues into, the early fall. So normally by mid-September, inside of every one of those cocoons, like what we passed around, is a full-size mason bee just hunkered down waiting for spring to come. And spring is when we start to see the temperatures at 55 and above, and this is Mother Nature at its best. Things start to warm up, flowers begin to open, food becomes available, the insects all around our neighborhood begin to hatch. The mason bee is one of the earliest that hatches. They're reaching into the flowers and getting their nectar pollen. The flowers are then getting pollinated. Also in the spring, when all of this is happening, of course, your migratory birds are flying up through the area. So we have swallows. We have the tree swallow, violet green swallow, cliff swallows that you have a lot around Port Townsend. You'll see them out, and why are they in the area? Well, they've migrated up following food sources as insects are hatching all the way from California north. So they'll arrive in your area. So every once in a while, you lose a female or two, to predation to those wonderful swallows. Again, back to the flicker. Our wonderful flicker has figured out that as the mason bee female is flying back and forth to pollinate, the flicker has learned to stand up here. And just with his big long tongue, it'll nab mason bees flying back and forth. So now we've had to take these things and put chicken wire over them to try and keep out the flicker. And I first encountered flickers when, like our can system here, this is like the one I passed around that was all filled. The flicker had learned that I see mud on these things. These humans are really pretty good people. They feed me bird seed, they put suet out, and then in the spring I see all these mudded over holes, and as an insectivore, when I'm going up and down a tree, like a nuthatch goes up and down, and you'll see them stop and they turn their head and they pull the bark away a little bit, and they'll find a grub behind there. The flicker does the same thing, looking for grubs. Aha, this is much easier. There's a lot of grubs up here. And one day, oh gosh, 8 years ago or so, I started to see all of my tubes pulled out and down on my deck, second level of my deck. And day 2, I saw it again. I put everything back in there. So day 3, I said, okay, I'm gonna sit out here. I'm gonna camp out on my deck. And then lo and behold, here was a flicker that flew up there and was pulling these out. Now, it couldn't open up the cardboard, but it certainly dropped them to the ground, and it was trying to, pull out the white paper liner, but it was unsuccessful. But the problem with them dropping to the ground, especially if it's early after the egg has been laid, the egg, if it's again in April when the flicker is doing this, the egg will fall off of the food source. The egg hatches and the larva, let's say now the larva is working away and doing its thing, and everything jostles these, or if a flicker pulls them out, that little larva will fall off these food source as well and die. And so when we're opening up our tubes and observing them, we'll see that activity where maybe there was too much wind, and I did not have, let's say I did not have my house properly adhered to the wall, and it got too much shaking around, I potentially might have lost some of the larvae. So that's one of the important things that we have to remember is put these all up, whatever house that you might buy, put them up on a secure wall. It could be your house, a garage, or a shed. I stay away from fences because fence in your good southwest winds, you can get a little bit of jostling on any fence that might be secure. So I'd kind of shy away from that unless that's your only option to mount your bees.
I have a question on the location of the houses and stuff. I put mine under the eaves and usually go right up underneath the plywood up under the area there. They're usually boxes or 3.5 by 3.5 blocks of wood.
Yep.
So, I noticed that one time I put one a little lower and the birds were nesting, sitting there at night. And I could see the poop on the ground.
They're up on top of it.
On the top there, so I don't know what birds they were, but I didn't see any damage to the hives. But I had to cover that up and stop the birds from nesting.
Yeah, his question is on location, and I do have mine up under my eaves as well, because now I've got rain protection, and I'm up on my second deck, so I've got mine all on the second deck, literally hundreds of these of different styles that we've tried. I even put up boxes with those cardboard tubes in them, big boxes. I just set them on a shelf, and the mason bees fill them. But when you get up under the eave, and you got it high on a wall, the sun is warming up the lawn or garden area, the sun is warming up the wall of your home, heat dissipates up under those eaves and is trapped there. So the heat of the home dissipates into the blocks all the way into the evening because the mason bees like that toasty environment. So good rain protection and get them up high. You mentioned, thank you for bringing that up, the old wood blocks are usually the old 4x4, which is really not 4x4, but it's 3.5 by 3.5. I don't know when that change happened. That was eons ago, well before my days. But those smaller blocks are shorter holes, so you only got maybe 3 inches where you've got your mason bees going in, unless you've drilled all the way through. And then, so you got 3.5 inches. What we have found over the years, this is Brian Griffin again and his good buddy, the deeper hole, like the 6-inch hole that you see here, versus the 3.5, in these holes here, like all of our products, we'll have more females. We're going to find inside of each and every one of these about 35 to 40% female cocoons. And thus you can see kind of that ratio of what I had passed around. In the old 3.5-inch blocks that we used to open up and harvest, we were around 20% females years ago, and because that's all we did. We just had blocks. So now with the deeper hole, you're creating a better environment for the female who is trying to lay as many female eggs as she can in a deeper hole. When she's impregnated, this is really kind of fun and important. When she's impregnated in that March, early April time frame, she has a sperm sac in her body. So when she goes deep into a hole, if she knows that the eggs will be safe back farther in the hole, And it could be even in the natural environment. She's going to lay her eggs in the bark of a gnarly fir tree where there's a long, deep hole. Or a branch broke off and it's rotted out. She'll go in deep into those. The deeper the hole, the better for her, because as she's deep down in here, in that back third to a half, as she's ovulating and releasing an egg, she releases sperm, thus creating the female egg. When she's out near the front, she doesn't, as she's ovulating, she doesn't release sperm, thus creating the male egg. So she'll determine the sex of the egg, and ladies, boy, the power you would have. It would be, well, you're more populated than we are anyway, but it could be incredibly different. So that's really a fascinating thing. So she creates the sex of the egg, she creates that false compartment in the front of every one of these, and that DNA of how they manage and process laying of their eggs and managing their environment is just so fascinating. The pollination part, the reason she's so successful is because of that hairy body. And when she's doing her work from last year was early April into May, when she's visiting flowers, she's going from tree to tree, shrub to shrub, plant to plant. She's cross-pollinating and visiting, and she's much, much faster than our good old honeybee. And when she hits a flower in the petals, you can actually observe this, she'll dive right down inside of there, and thus, you know, that pollen explodes from flower to flower, picks up on her body. But the honeybee and others, and wasps, others that might get after nectar and whatever, many of them sometimes will sit on the top side of a petal, and they'll reach down in there and drink out of the nectar. But honeybees are effective, as you well know, honeybees are effective just by sheer number. When you bring out hives, you're bringing out 50,000, 100,000 bees into a particular area. The mason bee with its singular work is effective just from the busyness that she has and how far she reaches with her cross-pollination.
I'm a little confused if we go back a little bit.
Sure.
The male and the female is, how does she produce a male without sperm?
The egg basically is laid, and if this doesn't apply, if there isn't sperm applied to that egg, apparently it becomes a male egg.
But
It's the same for the honeybee,
Yeah.
it's called parthenogenesis,
okay.
which is the ability of a species to have a fully formed male just with an unfertilized egg.
That's amazing.
Can you spell that?
GGG.
You know, I give a lot of talks, and I've been at Stedman's in Silverdale, you know, the Stedman operation there, and I'll stay for their whole meeting because they really get into all kinds of things, and it's fascinating to learn. So every time I give a talk, I do, you know, learn an awful lot, so I appreciate that. Okay, so anyway, I hope that answers. So we'll have to do a little research. We'll make sure that we're on target with this. Okay, so she is doing her work, and she will dive deep down in the flower. Cisco Morris calls them that they're his dive bombers, and he has all kinds of other names for them. And typical Cisco, you know, everything is ooh la la, and this. He just loves his mason bees. But she then, of course, is very effective in pollinating, and she's got so much pollen going from flower to flower. She effectively pollinates the full flower about 95% of the time. And all this data of the number of flowers that she visits, the effectiveness of the pollination, all comes out of really Washington State University. So a lot of graduate studies have been done over the years watching the mason bees, where these folks are out there in the field, you know, counting and looking at. Then they will look at the fruit development of when the mason bees were working on the particular flowers. Let's see where we are. Okay, I wanted to show you and pass these around. These are where we've opened up these straws. We kind of split the paper liners open so that they're easy to harvest our bees, and we'll pass these around. But when I open these up, you can kind of see the individual compartments that are inside of here. And one of the ends, I think this end here on my left, is that false compartment end, but she's laid her eggs from back to front. And then you'll be able to see that staining, you'll be able to see that darkness inside of here. And that darkness is the paper, much like in the natural environment, the paper is absorbing that excess moisture from the nectar and pollen. So it's kind of fascinating to see these different tubes that you can pass around. Don't use plastic. I guess the reason to mention paper is stay away from plastic, obviously. We've had many people who've gone to McDonald's or Burger King, wherever, and they kind of put whole bunch of straws in their pocket and head home. But plastic does not absorb the excess moisture, does not breathe. And when people have brought me Mason bees at, say, a show where they say these did not develop and what's happened, so we've opened them up. And inside of the plastic ones, you'll see the fact that the cocoon was spun, but it ruminated and died in its juices. It basically got moldy and died basically in its juices because nothing could wick off that extra moisture. So stay away from the plastic and always use paper.
I had some blocks that I drilled holes in, and the bees just came like crazy and just filled them up. And on Honeybee Sweet, she talked about putting paper straws in the tin can and putting them up, and we put 2 containers of those up, and not one bee went in.
Just paper liners?
No, they were just paper straws.
Just the paper straws?
1/4-inch paper straw, but no mason bees went in those whatsoever, and they were just filling up the drilled holes.
Yeah. We've experienced kind of the opposite of what you're doing. If your straws were 1/4 inch, if they were 1/4 inch, what we use is 5/16, just a little bit bigger. And the reason we use 5/16, it shouldn't make that much of a difference. The 1/4 inch, she might only lay males in there because it's narrower. But the 5/16, it gives them the opportunity to use it. Brian Griffin again and Dr. Torchio experimented for about 5 years on different hole sizes, from an 1/8 inch to 1/4 to 5/16 and bigger. And over these years in the studies, they found that the mason bees like the 5/16 inch hole. This past 4 years now, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but for the last 4 years, we've put up an equal number of the cardboard tube with the paper liners. And these cardboard tubes are reusable. They're a Mylar coated cardboard tube. So you can reuse that every year with the 5/16 inch hole paper liner that we pull out of there. So we had a whole bunch of these, probably again close to 200 different blocks. And my neighbor and I, he's an engineer from Wazoo and nothing to do, so he's helping. So we both kept track of what did they fill up first. Well, in our particular area in East Bremerton, they filled up all of the cardboard tube and paper liners first. Then they went to our wood blocks and then filled them up. Now he was all excited. He thought he had found something really exciting, being a good engineer that he is. And I just kind of cautiously said to him, if all we had put out were wood blocks, they would have filled them all up. If all we put out were the cardboard tubes and the paper liners, they would certainly have filled them up, because we have such a vast, large population of native orchid mason bees in our area now. They're going to find whatever hole that they can find to fill it up. But first come, first serve, the first thing they did was a cardboard tube and paper liner. But that's interesting to hear your experience, because every yard is a little different. Every yard is a little different, and we learn a lot, from these interactions.
Have you ever found that the location of the holes have a factor in it? That's kind of like lined up north and south, in direction. The other ones with straws will be more, octagon shapes and stuff, so.
Now and then, over these years, on the blocks especially, there might only be 2 or 3 females working it. So one female she might work right straight vertical like this. Another one might decide and she'll go across. So I will see some of these blocks with different holes filled and then others absolutely empty. But I've got so many mason bees working, any holes that I provide, they seem to fill up. This past year, we were so successful. It got to be, trying to remember my journal, I think it was around about April 30th. And I was running out of space in my general blocks and things that I put up. And I just took a great big cardboard box, kind of like a shoe box, and I filled it with all of these cardboard tubes and paper liners. The whole thing, I just filled it. And so April 30th through to May 7th, it was probably have about 1,100 to 1,200 cardboard tubes. They filled up every single one of those in that period, that 8-day period of time, because the weather was so perfect. It was a nice 70-degree weather, and the sun was out, and the blocks were warm, and the flowers were available. So again, answer the question, I can put out almost anything in any environment, and they will find their particular hole. The other fascinating thing about the orchard mason bee females, you'll have on this one here, or the block behind me, you'll have maybe 5 to 6 to 7 females all working the same block. And what each female has, she has her own femoral scent, pheromone scent. She'll have her own scent that she'll put on a particular hole. So as she's flying back and forth, she'll land on here, you'll see her bouncing around on the front. Then all of a sudden, in she goes. And you're nodding your head, exactly. In she goes, she has found the spot where she would have been doing the budding or the nectar pollen. Another female is working the other holes. So again, 5 to 8 different females will work one block. Because they've laid that femoral scent, when they land, they'll figure out the hole that they needed. So they're doing their natural way of finding a hole. And there's products out there, so be careful. There's this market now on mason bees is kind of big now, and a lot of farmers doing a lot of good things. But there's some products being sold now that are called scent cloths. Well, and sprays, scent cloths and sprays. So if you can imagine, in the natural environment again, she does her own finding and she lays her own femoral scent on a hole. You start to spray and mask over all of that, or rub a cloth that they call a femoral scent cloth or whatever, you might mask over all of the effort that they had undergone. So I stay away from some of these things and just go back to nature again, go back to what, like with your honeybees. I know you're working a lot of issues and problems with honeybees. The same thing with our mason bees. There are some issues, predators and predation that we have. So Mother Nature at its best always kind of lean back to what's happening in Mother Nature. Yes, sir.
What about exposure for where should you put them on the house? North, south, east, west?
A good one. Especially for those of you that are brand new. Again, how many are brand new here that are just going to start? Okay, for those of you that are brand new, this is kind of important. There's a 4-part process for you to get going in orchard mason bees. Location, location, location. East-facing wall is the best because you get that early morning sun coming up and over. The early morning sun is getting the flowers going. It gets the mason bees going. Then as the sun clears over your house and settles in the west, everything has warmed up nicely up under your eaves and wherever. So east is best. South is number 2. South is 2 for those of you that are brand new. Well, guess where the farmer has all of his up? Mine are all facing the Olympic Mountains. West. I'm facing due west with all my houses. Reason being, I've got a green belt on the east and a green belt on the south behind our house. And so my sun doesn't hit the house until maybe noon or 1 o'clock when it starts to peek over the big trees that are getting bigger and bigger. So I'm a little bit different. So when you're just starting, east or south, when you're really into it over a number of years, put them on all walls because they'll hatch at different times during the year. So mine are all very active in the midday and afternoon. And then I'll be watching them right up until 6 or 7 o'clock at night in the late spring. And the sun, all of a sudden, as the sun begins to set, the sun starts to go over. And you can kind of sense it if you can feel it. The sun is kind of hitting you, and then all of a sudden it clears. The mason bees are exactly the same way. When that sun starts to set and move down, they're coming back to the houses, and they're going to go back in here, and they're going to settle down for the night. The temperatures start to go from the 60s and down into the 55 and 54, 53. Mason bee comes back home and settles down for the night. And that's so much fun to watch because they'll be out here with their little heads poking out, and you can kind of see them, and you put your finger up to them, and back in they go, the females. At night, this is even cuter. At night, and the reason I do this is I can then determine by the time of the spring and by the number of holes I still have available and what they have already mudded over. When I go out there at night, I will shine my flashlight on here, and all I see are a bunch of big purple butts. They turn around and they go back in, and their backside is facing out so that when the sun or heat comes back up again, their body warms up and their metabolism gets back into appropriate area. So when I go out there at night, usually about 10-ish, I then can count. I'll count the number of females that are on this block. I mark that block number 105, and I see 8 females. So that's how I've determined number of females that might be working any number of these different houses that I have up. So that's an awful lot of fun, especially for kids, great projects for school.
When, on the mason bees that you're not harvesting and selling the cocoons, you just let them hatch out of the tubes naturally,
Yes.
and then you throw those tubes away?
The ones that have, hatched naturally, and I'll see the mud in the front all eaten away, I'll pull the paper liners out of all of those, or open up my wood blocks, usually around April 15th. Everybody should have hatched out. For this season, this year, when we're brand new, everybody should have hatched out, and you will then be able to replace the paper liners. That's for our veterans. For the folks that are new, your first year, you just need to provide your location, a house, and a set of bees, and then you're get to go. But you don't have to do any of this cleaning. But for the rest of us, I do pull them out and I harvest the cocoons and I replace the paper liner with a brand new one. So in a matter of a day, I can change out, like that one can that went around that was filled, I can pull all those paper liners out in a matter of 5 minutes. I put new paper liners in there, I put that can back out, and now it's available again for the nesting females. Yeah, does that answer that?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. I have about a dozen nests under the eave, and I'm just wondering how many is too much, and how far do the bees actually go and pollinate? So that, I'm in the woods, so I have
Yep.
about a dozen orchard tree, apple trees and fruit trees, and maybe too many? Do they go further and help other neighbors,
Yeah,
or are they just
exactly.
doing it in
For
my
those of
yard?
you that have been at it a while, the first year, for the ones that are new, they have a 100-yard range. So that from your house or shed, they're gonna have a range of 100 yards that they're reaching out. And like you've been doing it for a while, they're not gonna lay all their eggs back at your 9 or 10 homes that you have. They're gonna be laying eggs around the neighborhood. Old wood piles, they love old wood piles with the rotted out grooves that are in there. Neighbors that have shake roofs or shake siding, that's a mason bee house all by itself. You don't have to do anything. They'll get up into the grooves of, what is it called,
T111.
T111. They'll get up into these grooves and mud over and lay their eggs in there. So you really, in some cases, some people will put these up and they'll say, well, I don't want to have all this work to do. They'll just leave their houses out, let the bees come and go, and reuse the houses without cleaning them.
Do the bees have sort of a homing instinct so that the bees that emerge from a house want to go back to that same place?
The homing instinct,
Yeah.
like your honeybees, yeah, they do
But
have.
they go back and lay eggs
Yeah.
in the same?
In the most cases, if you're gonna start new, and let's say you put your new cocoons up here in our little birthing shelter, the cocoons are up here, and when they hatch out of here, they're gonna be warming themselves kind of on this block itself. And then they'll see the holes, they have great eyesight, they'll be able to see the holes that are here. And so as they're going back and forth, hopefully they're all gonna home back to your particular house. Your honeybees, of course, it's automatic. I don't know how they do it. My neighbor across the street from me in East Bremerton has 5 hives and spent an awful lot of money putting all of this in. And but her bees come over and use my bird baths. And honeybees don't swim well, neither do mason bees. So I'm always kind of helping her honeybees out of my bird bath. And the darn things, every once in a while, about every 5th one will sting me. And so I've learned now, I'm putting floating bark in there. I put a little bit of floating bark in my bird baths because I
That's
feed the
smart.
birds alongside of where I've got all my mason bee stuff going on. So I send her a bill every month for her homing honeybees, and she laughs. And she gives me honey at the end of the season, usually for Christmas or Thanksgiving. So we have a nice little relationship. Yeah.
So I have some old blocks, and they do not have a smooth cover on them, but they have grains of sand or something like that. But we do not have any mud in our area. We don't have any clay. It's all sandy loam. So
All of these people with the great questions are keeping me on target, and so the check will be in the mail later for each of you.
no, I'm not a shill.
So this is a short story. Here is clay. This is right out of Eastern Oregon. I mean, beautiful stuff. I don't know how they do this. But the guy that provides me many of my bees, he's kind of the biggest bee farmer in America out of Kent, Washington, Jim Watts. He introduced clay about 4 years ago because I buy stuff from him. And he said, you got to buy my clay in these bags. I said, I can't sell clay to, I feel bad selling clay to you. And he says, you got to try it. It'll work. So 4 years ago, I bought the stuff, and then I brought it to the Northwest Flower and Garden Show in Seattle. I brought 2 boxes of this stuff. Must have been 150 of these. And Thursday afternoon, show opens on Wednesday, Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock, they were all gone.
Wow.
And then I figured out it was the Canucks that had come down. The Canucks out of Alberta, Vancouver, and that whole area, Wednesday and Thursday is their big days to be bussed down, and they do their thing. So we'll have a lot of clay available for our good neighbors to the north. But this is Eastern Oregon clay. What I do with this is I'll mix a little bit of sand or grit with it, and then I keep it moist, and I use a real shallow plastic bird bath, something you can find anywhere, Hadlock, True Value, the Wild Brazil Limited up the road. So get a shallow little bird bath, a little clay that you can put in there. Who said he has a lot of clay?
I've got a lot.
Okay, a lot of clay. Okay, you can sell clay to your buddies here. Next meeting, when he comes in with a bunch of bags, buck a bag, $2.
Yeah.
So I mix it to give it a little bit of a granular touch to it, like you saw on that can that came around. And I mist it every morning, and keep it moist.
Yeah.
So now I've got my deck rail. I've got a second deck are all of my houses. Mine are all up under the eaves like yours, but I do have them on other locations because we do farm them and we check when everybody's hatching. So on that deck rail of my west-facing location, I've got all brand new potted Pyrrhus japonicus. So what is the best flower in the late winter spring? It's the Pyrrhus japonicus. It's a bellflower, little blooming bellflower, pinks and yellows and whites. And you can find them at any of your nurseries, even True Value, I think, in Hadlock carries them, and your other nurseries here in the neighborhood. But if you can't remember the name, just remember Paris, France, or Paris, Japan. Paris, Japan, Pyrrhus japonicus, if that makes sense. And then the nursery will laugh at you, but they'll know exactly what you're talking about for that plant. So I buy big ones. I spend a little bit more money, a big, maybe a 5-gallon one, that are already flowering, and I put new ones every year on my deck rail, usually about 5. So here's all my houses. I've got a little mudding tray on the deck rail over here. I've got all these new flowers right in front of my mason bees, because most of the gardening around is, I am not a gardener, so most of the effort that my mason bees do is they go to the neighbors and reach out. You know, that's the growth of the bees in our backyard. So when I've got all that so close, it's so easy for them, and it's so fun for me to be able to take videos of them working up and down the different plants. So that's a great plant if you're brand new. Pyrrhus japonicus is a good one to bring in your backyard. Then remember, you got a little bit of digging to do to plant that new thing in your backyard. I think I'm running out of room with all the plants that I've put in. Yes, sir.
Parasite question. So are the mites a tracheal mite, or are they attacking the larva?
No, we don't have varroa or tracheal with a problem with the mason bees yet. That's strictly your honeybee. The mite we have that's a problem is called the Crombini mite, named after a doctor, Dr. Crombini. I think he was a European, actually. And so that mite came up with the importation of queens out of, I believe, South America many years ago. I don't know what species, but apparently they came up. That was the determination by the USDA lab. This mite arrived. Then the mite adapted itself quite well to the environment up here in Pacific Northwest, which is kind of dank and cold and moisty, but it adapted itself. And so the mason bees in the natural environment were picking up this mite on their body, and they would be bringing them back to the tubes, and the mite would be deposited in a particular section. So that's why, like you do, you drill out the holes all the time. You've got to make sure, if you see that mite infestation, try and get rid of it. And I'll pass around so you can kind of see. This is really cool. This is, like really cool. This is my engineer from Washington State University again. I've got 2 of these. And you'll be able to see in here, we have these vertically, you'll be able to see in here all the cocoons that I haven't touched yet. But you'll also see in here, you'll see this yellow mass of Crombini mites, which stays in a particular section. So when we do open these up and clean it out, I will get rid of all the mites after I've harvested my cocoons. So we'll have good cocoons kind of sitting in here alongside of some mite infestation. So that's kind of cool to pass that around. Try not to shake it a little bit, but not a real problem if you do, because I'll be able to clean it out anyway. This one is even bigger and better, where you can kind of see some of the yellow masses of mite infestations that might be in a particular section. The mite does not move beyond that particular section, but as a mason bee female exits in and out of these things, she'll pick up the mites on the way through. Then she brings them back into the environment of your home. So that's why we open all this up every year. If it's too much work for you when you got a lot of these, maybe at least do a random sampling of opening up to look for mite infestations. And if you don't find anything, then you can pretty well assume that maybe the rest of your mason bees are okay. Now, since we're farming, and I buy a lot from all kinds of different people all around the area, so I'm always testing out what they're sending to me to see what kind of mite infestation they might have. The most recent thing that happened to us, and this is probably 3 days ago, the USDA lab again down there in Utah, they found where people were finding inside of their holes, they were finding a big grub, a big yellow, or white, excuse me, a big white egg, big larva. And what this is called a Houdini fly from Europe. This Houdini fly is a new predator to our mason bees. And this was found just about 4 or 5 days ago. The guy that I work with, who's kind of the biggest farmer of bees in the country, Jim Watts, sent a bunch of his eggs that he's found, or the larvae, off to the USDA lab so they can hatch them and grow them. I forget how he called it, but they'll take them, get them into a nice warm environment, just to confirm that what hatches out of here is that Houdini fly. So on his one particular farm that he has bees up in, or mason bee blocks, about 40% of the blocks at this one particular farm down in Belfair had the fly infestation in different sections. The ones I passed around here is probably less than 5% of a Crumbini mite infestation each of the sections. So again, when we pull our mason bee cocoons out, we'll put them into a colander and shake them and clean off all the debris and the poopies. We'll then wash them, dry them, and then we basically have got them ready for sale in the just general market. And so that's how we do it. The new folks, all of you that are new, again, a four-step process: location. A set of bees, we sell them in little boxes like this. There's 9 females, 16 males in here. 9 females, 16 males. We put our new box, we take the lid off, we put our new little bees. We either pour them in by themselves, we put them up here. They hatch out of your little nursing shelter here, and then hopefully backfill. And so location, a set of bees, a shelter, and a house. When do we put them up? End of February. So the 4-part thing is location, bees, a house, and then you put it up the end of February for those folks that are brand new. My engineer, my Wazoo guy, he's gotten so excited about these things that he makes, he's now attached an observation box to the side of
That is really
the
cool.
little house he makes.
Yeah.
And this is a true story. He and I were Boy Scout leaders for years and years. I was a scout master, and he would drive us in, just drop us off and he'd go back home. But he retired from the torpedo station in Keyport years ago, and he's a golden coug, been retired for 50 years, but now he makes all this stuff in his garage. His wife thinks I'm the most wonderful thing since post OCs because it keeps him in the garage and busy, and I get a bottle of wine every month if I keep him busy. So that's a short story.
I've heard that some people put the cocoons in the refrigerator if they want to delay the time for them to come out.
Exactly. So coming up here, I've got 2 little freeze packs inside of here. And otherwise, I can create a hatch pretty quickly in here. I keep them in my hand. So I start refrigerating usually end of January, early February. I don't like refrigerators too much because they have a tendency to draw moisture out and humidity out of whatever might be in there, celery, food, and mason bees. People have their mason bees die inside of the refrigerator. But this time of year, when we get closer to hatching, and myself when I'm out giving talks, and I'll be giving talks into April, I do start refrigeration in February, but I always have a glass of water a little Tupperware thing of water. I'll take up a wad of paper toweling and I'll have that in there just to keep the humidity level up. And most refrigerators, I keep a little temperature thing in there. 38 to 40 degrees is perfect. And the reason to refrigerate is to keep their metabolism low. You don't want them burning up too much of their fat levels. And if you can refrigerate them, you can introduce mason bees into the natural environment as late as mid-April. You can keep delaying it and then see you're extending the pollination time for all your mason bees in your backyard. You're extending it from normally early May. Now they can be pollinating right up in the mid part of June. So we've had some pretty good success with that. Pretty good success. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
wait, one more question, and now we've got to move on to.
Do you find that a mason bee favors any particular blossom in an orchard?
In an orchard, no, it does. I haven't seen a particular blossom. A blossom is a blossom, a flower is a flower to them. Those that are producing nectar, they're going to hit whatever might be presented to them. They got great eyesight, and I haven't seen any studies from WSU or Oregon State or any of our local universities on if there's a preference.
Have you found any strategic places where you might place the hive in an orchard? If the bee only flies 100 yards usually, in its major area.
That's a great question. If it's further out, then people have to put 4x4 posts into the ground, put some exterior plywood on it, put a little roof over it, maybe a little windbreak because of the winds that come from our southwest. So they'll have to place a bee board out nearer that orchard area. The farmers that we sell bees to, I sell them to avocado farmers down in California. They've got them out in different areas of their avocado fields, and they've had to build boxes, great big boxes on the 4x4s.
Wait, Dave, I said one more question. I'd like to get away with 2, no more.
It's like a democratic debate, isn't it? I mean,
No more questions, no more questions. We gotta move on, we've got lessons to give here. Gary's got to say.
So, just lastly for us, I'll hang around if there's anything you need, especially you new folks. I've got a talk up in Port Angeles at 2 o'clock, so I got plenty of time before I whisk my way north. But I can hang around if you want to get anything.
Yeah, we have things.
And
We have things for
Jim
sale.
is selling. Jim is selling here.
Okay, good.
So.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jim.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks for the great questions.
All right, meeting is adjourned.
Good. You see that?
That was very interesting.